Welcome, everyone. It's an absolute delight to see you all here today and to get to introduce to you all my friend Harjeet Singh, who's joining us from New Delhi. Uh, and it's just, it's an absolute delight to have everyone here today to have this conversation that we're looking forward to having on defending the front lines and climate justice, imperialism, and the questions around how we can meet the demands of reparations and true justice in a time of climate breakdown. So for those of you who might be new to this forum, this is Quaker Earthcare Witness, and I am Keith Runyon. I'm our general secretary here. And Quaker Earthcare Witness is the North American Quaker environmental representative Quaker environmental organization that works globally and across the U.S. and Canada to try to push forward a Quaker voice on ecological issues, climate issues, and really trying to build environmentalism as a foundation of what it means to be a Quaker or a friend. Um, so it's really, I just want to say, I met Harjeet just about a couple years ago in Bonn, where she's just returned from a 40-day trip, which began in there as well. And it was in a small conference room that we were, having a conversation with a number of interfaith leaders. And I just was absolutely stunned by Harjeet's clarity, his brilliance, and throughout the conference, his leadership of many different actions that were speaking uncomfortable truths to those who would probably rather not hear them. And so it was a really powerful thing to just see Harjeet's presence. And we saw each other again at COP30, which was a fantastic sort of reconnection. But then I was uh, shocked this last January to see the way in which Harjeet, we there was a just kind of a signal chat that I was part of, and I saw Harjeet's name on a post from The Guardian saying that Harjeet had been arrested for his advocacy and his activism. The Narendra Modi government was clearly not having it anymore with the willingness to speak about the need for climate action. And despite the fact that Harjeet has often advocated so fervently for the rights of uh, people in the Indian subcontinent, especially the most vulnerable. So um, we have a lot of things to get into today, and I'm excited to get into them with you all. But I just wanted to quickly say that Harjeet has been doing this for well over 25 years in his roles currently as the founding director of Satat Sempada Climate Foundation, which is the local regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture organization that Harjeet and his wife Jyoti both founded together to take some of what Harjeet was doing on the international stage home. He's also the global convener for the Fill the Fund campaign, which is demanding that rich countries pay for the damages that they're causing on an international scene. And I would say Harjeet is well known for being one of the most foundational personalities in pushing for the existence of the Loss and Damage Fund in the international scene. So he's played a seminal role in that. Harjeet is also the strategic advisor to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, which just broke ground in a lot of powerful discussions adjacent to this in the conference in Santa Marta, Colombia, where small about 58 countries, I think it was, ended up pulling together to demand change and say that we need to be not just challenging emissions, but fossil fuels themselves. So it's with great pleasure and joy that I want to invite Harjeet to speak to us. Thank you so much, Harjeet. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Keith. And I must say, a pleasure is mine to speak to you and everybody here on this webinar. And I must say that, as you have seen, I have been engaging with the faith community for a very long time as part of my climate justice work. And I must say that I get deeply inspired by the work faith community is doing because of their connection with the community, the grassroots work, the care, compassion, and everything the faith community stands for. And my own connection with Sikh religion and the heritage that I draw a lot from. If you know a little bit about Sikh religion, uh, selfless service, what we call seva, is at the very core of our values. And one phrase that keeps coming up in our prayers so many times, which is in Gurumukhi language, in Punjabi language, it's known as Sarbat Da Pala, which actually means the welfare of all humanity and creation. So, and we say that, it's beyond a particular religion or a nationality. It's for all humanity. It's for the entire world. So I connect with that very deeply, and that continues to inspire me, whatever little I do or contribute to this work on climate justice or social equity. So what I'm going to do, as you suggested, I'm going to share some of the work that I am engaged in, what shapes my thinking, and the work that I'm trying to do as part of climate justice and social justice work, and then it'll be very nice to open up and then have a more conversation than just a monologue from my side. So, but I can start with the presentation. And thank you very much for your kind introduction with me. Is that okay if I share my presentation? Yeah, I hope you can see the full screen. Okay. So yeah, I wear several hats and I'm engaged in different initiatives. And during my presentation, I will explain why that's the case and how I look at things. I'm starting with this slide because my entry into the climate work is through the humanitarian field, and I was a humanitarian worker. Um, Spent a lot of time with communities. I come from the grassroots. That's how I thought that I need to start working in the climate space. I live in North India. That's where we were seeing many disasters, and I'm talking about 3 decades ago. And when I started going deep into it, I realized that 90% of disasters were climate related. And I also realized that it were the same communities who are getting impacted over and over again. And I've met communities in Bangladesh, in several parts of the world, who have rebuilt their houses several times in their life. When I remember meeting somebody who said, I have rebuilt my house more than 20 times. I mean, imagine for us to rebuild our home even twice is a huge lift. And so people who were and have been getting affected by disasters again and again, um, that's what really encouraged me and pushed me to work on the issue of climate justice. And as you can see on this infographic, which has come from the UN, how the world is now facing many new newish kind of disasters, or the scale has increased dramatically. Of course, we are much more aware about the extreme weather events, and which have become a lot more extreme. We talk about drought or tropical cyclones and storm surge floods. Heat wave has become such a regular phenomenon. I was in London for the Climate Action Week, and we have seen how the whole world is getting affected, including North America, Canada, and the US. But there are other disasters which we still do not talk enough about. And that's land and forest degradation that's happening because of climate change, or increasing temperatures on an average, increasing desertification, which is also causing a lot of displacement and migration, rising sea levels, glacial retreat or loss of biodiversity, something that we still don't relate with as much, but we know that ocean acidification is having a huge impact on coastal communities. And many you won't even find on this infographic by the UN. For example, we are seeing epidemics also having a connection with climate. We are seeing landslides being now more intense, caused by excessive rains. So there are many spiral effects of disasters that we are seeing because of climate change. And if you look at the bottom part of the slide, we talk about economic losses, which we are generally well aware of. But one nomenclature which I generally don't agree with, that says non-economic, but essentially we are talking about social, cultural, and environmental impacts. Because by saying non-economic, we actually reduce the importance of these impacts. But look at how people are losing their lives, their health, human mobility that is now being caused, which is a massive issue around the world. And I'll share some figures. Loss of territory. I have met people in Sundarbans, which is a very fragile ecosystem here shared between India and Bangladesh. People showed me their land titles and papers saying, that's where my house was, and pointing towards the sea several 100 feet and saying, that's where my house was. It's now swallowed by sea. So there are new poor who are getting created by these disasters, who were not dealing with such challenges earlier. And they lose the territory forever. And I'm talking about countries which have very high population, densely populated, and there's not enough land that can be provided to people in Bangladesh. And we know that they're going to lose about 16% of their land in the next few decades. Imagine, one of the most populous countries in the world. And it's not just a national problem, it's going to cause a global problem when people start moving. And we know that we are already living in a world where cross-border migration is being politicized for people's vested interest and gains. We also see cultural heritage being lost, which is connected to migration mobility. But in general, when you do not have your um, the flora and fauna that existed hundreds, decades ago, or hundreds of years ago, or seasons are changing. You cannot practice a particular culture. Indigenous knowledge is being challenged in so many ways. The way impacts are increasing, and climate is changing so fast. Cultural identities are being affected, biodiversity loss, ecosystem services, and so on. And the list goes on. I'm just saying how we are now only beginning to understand some of these impacts, but they are increasing in so many ways. And I talked about migration. We can see that, of course, due to conflicts and violence, there is a lot of displacement. And this figure is only from 54 countries. But if you look at about 82 countries, 13 million people were displaced by disasters in 2025. And as I said, this is a massive issue. But something that defines my perspective and my thinking, and why we need to talk about climate justice. And this is more than 20-year-old illustration. And yeah, I would be very keen to get your reflections before we move further. What do you see in this illustration? What does it say? And we have some reflections. Keith, I won't be able to say people are raising hands, so if you can help facilitate, if there are people who would like to either speak to that or write in the text. what you are seeing in this illustration.
If you want to unmute and say something really quick, I think that would be fine as well.
Yeah.
The North is taking up way, way more than its share of the ecological space. Self-evident, but
Indeed.
not talked about.
We are the
Absolutely. Yeah,
we are
please go
the
ahead.
bullies.
We are the bullies. Yeah.
I've just been reading chapters 1 and 2 of Jeremy Lent's new book, Eco-Civilization. It is the most compelling history of just how this has happened and how it is still going on. It's kind of fundamental starting point for our work. Thank you so much for naming it.
Thank you, Nancy, and everybody. Yeah, please go ahead.
I didn't notice the disproportional amount that the North was taking of the bench. But what I saw Ursula just mentioned in the chat, that we're being protected, we're still dry, we're not suffering, but the effects of our protection are falling on the people of the South.
Absolutely, and that was going to be my next question. Are you looking at the umbrella? And thank you for naming it. Please go ahead.
We're not making room for anyone else.
Yeah. Absolutely, and if you look at the umbrella, which signifies resources, so while global North has taken space, but it can also protect itself. So impacts are happening, of course, disproportionately in the global South, also because of the geographical location. But now we are also seeing impacts in the global North. But people who have resources, whether it's, and now it's also important to name elites and oligarchs who have resources, who are also building bunkers, they will be able to protect themselves. But who is most exposed? And if you look at the umbrella, it's the global South. And that is something so important for us to integrate in our work and perspective, that even if impacts are now increasing in other parts, what matters is whether communities in the global South have those kind of resources that they can protect themselves, which is not the case. So how we talk about redistribution of resources so that we can protect people who are being impacted by climate impacts when they had little role in causing the climate crisis.
I see one additional item that nobody mentioned that seems to be obvious, and that there seems to be a racial message too.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Thank you for naming it. So I find this very powerful, to really put everything in one frame for us to understand what's going on. And as I said, this is about 2 decades old, yet not many things have changed, except a few exceptions. We are still living in the world where cumulatively greenhouse gas emissions, which are trapped in the atmosphere, were caused by global North. And what is more troubling now is if we unpack and go beyond just countries, how richest 10% are responsible for a massive amount of emissions, and within that 1% is responsible for double the carbon emissions of the poorest 50%, and rest of the world is actually suffering. And this is the latest inequality report, which talks about further concentration of resources. And if you look at how bottom 50% pockets, how 8% actually pockets 50% of income, and middle 40% about the same level, and it's the top 10% that is having more than 50% of share. Sorry, I flipped it. So it's the 8% of income is going to 50% of people. So that's the inequality that we are seeing. And if you look at the wealth, It's top 10%, which is actually controlling 75% of global wealth. And that's where we start naming a trillionaire from the US, who briefly became a trillionaire, but of course, very close to that. So we need to also look at how top 1% is controlling both income and wealth in the world, which and inequality is something which is affecting not only now people in the global south, but also in the global north. And that's where, and I keep it in my mind when I heard this phrase that people in the West are also now choosing between heating and eating as energy prices went up in the last few years, starting with the war on Ukraine and now the war on Iran, how that is affecting people around the world. And something that, which I will talk about later, should unite us against this inequality and those elites who are putting us in that situation. And some more data on how billionaires' fortunes have grown at a rate several times faster in the last year itself. And if you compare that with what their income was in the last 5 years, for instance. So their income has been increasing several fold and causing more and more inequality. Now, another aspect, because we are talking about climate justice and the cause of the climate crisis, something that deeply bothers me and so many of us, is that while we celebrate renewables, but our reliance on fossil fuels has not changed massively. We still remain dependent on fossil fuels for majority of our energy needs, and that is deeply troubling, because it doesn't matter how much renewables would grow unless they start displacing the use of fossil fuels, because climate change is caused by the extraction and burning of fossil fuels and will not have any impact on unless we have displaced fossil fuels. Renewables will not be able to have that impact, because we also see energy needs growing now in different parts of the world. And that's where, when we look at whether climate regime is addressing it at the international level, the reality is it is not. And there is no explicit legal obligations. We know that the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Convention on Climate Change did not mention about fossil fuels, coal, oil, or gas. And 35 years down the line, we are also seeing that there is no transition support. We know that if economies and people who are dependent on fossil fuels, you cannot turn off the tap immediately, particularly in developing countries. We need a transition plan, and there is no support available. Rather, we see so many trade and investment barriers, which are making the transition way, way harder. And of course, we are not on track. We are going to produce much more fossil fuels. And this is a report, a production gap report, a couple of years ago. Now, with Donald Trump is investing more and more in fossil fuels, we are way off the target. Let me skip this. I already explained. And also countries who are dependent on fossil fuels, and especially now when we look at the war in the Middle East and the oil shock that we have seen, how fossil fuels have a direct connection with foreign exchange being sucked more and more as prices go up. We see countries facing debt issues. They have very less fiscal space. And of course, with energy insecurity and price volatility, which is going up. So countries remain extremely exposed to price volatility, and those are the ones who are least able to transition, and they need much more support, yet that is not available, and they are left on their own. So when we look at climate crisis, clearly it's not about climate action. It's a justice crisis that we are seeing, and that's why, as awareness has grown over the last few years, as we see climate impacts increasing, there is now an escalating call for reparations. We now demand compensation and redress from countries and corporations who not only have high historical emissions, but continue to emit more and more. And we know that fossil fuels are and their emissions are the primary drivers of the climate crisis. So when we talk about reparations, we are talking about the principle of restorative justice. And when we demand money, it is definitely not aid. It is about justice. It's about how we can rectify how climate change has intensified and exacerbated existing injustices and structural inequalities. So somebody mentioned about racial discrimination. Yes, everything is connected. When we talk about colonialism, how it left very little capacity. I know Keith shared my TED talk with you in the invitation where I did mention how the region that I live in, if I talk about Indian subcontinent, when Britishers came 250 years ago, Indian subcontinent, its share in the global GDP was close to 25%, one quarter. And when they left, its contribution to the global GDP was merely 4%. And there's a study done by the Columbia University, a professor called Utsa Patnaik. She calculated that if you look at the extraction of wealth that happened at the current cost, it amounts to more than $40 trillion. So imagine when we talk about extraction of resources and colonialism that drove that. Of course, this region, when we talk about Bangladesh or Pakistan or India or those countries or Sri Lanka, I'm talking about only one region where I come from, is left with very little capacity to cope. And same is true for Africa, same is true for Latin America. So, of course, those things matter because you see economic disparity, you see lack of resources. So, it's all connected. And the work that, again, Keith was mentioning, where I'm engaged more and more, we also see the term loss and damage as impacts are increasing. We talk about how these reparations need to support communities and countries who are facing these impacts to deal with all kinds of impacts. And of course, we look at it from a human perspective and not just as an environmental problem, which was also the case several decades ago. Whenever we talked about climate change, we used to see pictures of melting ice caps and polar bears, which is also a reality. But then we also need to look at how human beings are affected, who are part of that ecosystem, and impacts are being felt by them first and worst, and they have very little capacity and they are not the ones responsible. We are also seeing another thing which we need to talk about more and more as we see climate action increasing, but there are actions that are going to harm these communities much more. And that's not only in the global north, but also in the global south. For example, massive projects of solar panels are displacing communities. And we are not talking about people who are going to lose their jobs when we shut down coal-fired power plant. That's why the issue of just transition becomes extremely important. And that's why we say, when we say climate justice, it's about how we can make sure that our actions are going to be fair, equitable, and also protecting the rights of people who are most vulnerable and who are most affected. And then, of course, questions who pays the bill and what do we do about fossil fuels, and all the work that all of you are doing as Quakers, as the wider faith community, is putting a spotlight on the fossil fuel industry. And so when we talk about climate justice, broadly, we talk about two core pillars. Of course, historical responsibility. Again, we know how cumulative emissions are there from the global north. And if we look at the population of the global north or developed nations, is 12%, but responsible for more than 50% of historical emissions since the Industrial Revolution. So the concept of carbon debt or climate debt comes from there. And then, of course, disproportionate impacts that we are seeing in the global south. So definitely we need to make sure that we look at these issues when we talk about climate justice on how communities such as farmers or people living in coastal areas or indigenous communities or even urban poor who are getting affected. Climate finance, that's why, is absolutely key. And as per some calculations, we need trillions of dollars, and we demanded $5 trillion. If you look at the overall climate bill, be it mitigation, adaptation, and now dealing with losses and damages. And the reality is that developed countries have not even provided $100 billion. And even when they claim that those billions have been provided, we know on one hand it's full of debt, and then all creative accounting. They're also including even the private sector mobilization, and not what needs to come from the treasury, from governments as public finance. So more loans than grants. And we also see imbalance between adaptation and mitigation. Again, because market is investing in renewables, they show mitigation is happening, but the reality is that we are not giving enough money for adaptation, and that's why we see communities getting more and more impacted. When we look at the international context, and again from loss and damage work, when we have seen some progress, we managed, after 30-year fight, we managed to get a decision on loss and damage fund. And but the fact is that we have not yet provided a single penny. In fact, last week I was in Manila, where the loss and damage fund board meeting was held, the ninth board meeting. Yet we are struggling to provide money, even if we have close to $1 billion, about $822 million in pledges. Just a little more than half have been monetized, and we are still not able to provide money for various reasons, including the way it is hosted by the World Bank, and not enough money, and too many proposals. So while we see progress, we have not seen real delivery. We also see exponential growth in climate litigation, which people are now seeing as one of the tools to repair the harm, and also seek accountability. We also see a lot of discourse happening. I also engage with the academic community, and I was talking to them just a few days ago, how the whole conversation about reparations has increased fundamentally, and really informing now the scholarly discourse and work. And of course, we are very excited about the International Court of Justice advisory opinion. Thanks to the leadership from the Pacific nations, we now have a very powerful legal lever that we can use for climate reparations, holding governments to account, and particularly major emitters, and also looking at transboundary climate harm, something that the advisory opinion clarifies, and of course, demanding compensation, all connecting with international human rights, customary laws, and also existing environmental laws. Let me go a little bit quickly so that we have space and time for more interaction. Again, just to bring various aspects together, we look at historical aspects, we look at justice aspects, and also political part, and how we can mobilize political will to make sure that we are able to implement those decisions and laws that we have been able to secure. And then, of course, again, your work on polluter pays and state responsibility, human rights. We look at domestic legal revenues, very much applicable for the US. Of course, your super funds that are now seeing a lot of support. There are also examples in Australia. We have seen some remarkable cases. We also now see more work on the economic aspects of quantifying loss and damage, so that we can say how we need hundreds of billions of dollars and trillions as part of financial transfers, and how we need to make sure that the historical harms are corrected. Also, we see cultural aspects, which should be seen through the climate reparations lens. When we see cultural heritage getting affected, livelihoods being destroyed, which are traditional, and people's connection to country. In fact, Tuvalu, which is going to host the second conference on transitioning away from fossil fuels. The reason it has taken up that leadership, because we are probably and painfully going to see that country being wiped out and being swallowed by sea because of rising sea levels. So it is actually facing an existential crisis. So how do we look at not only how they lose territory, but also their culture and their connection to their homeland? and of course involving indigenous communities on the aspects of justice and healing and restoration. Now, moving forward, how we look at, and again connecting with the work that all of you are engaged in the work in the US and Canada. So we need to look at more and more coalition building and consensus building, and we need that multi-stakeholder collaboration. So whether we talk about involving academicians and legal professionals and policymakers, climate justice organizers, indigenous communities, and also private sector, and building much broader public support and political will. I already talked about the litigation part and advocacy. Of course, we are demanding a fossil fuel treaty, which I'll briefly touch upon, and then how we talk a little bit more about the culture of reparation, which is really coming uh, as bottom up, and a lot more public education that is required about historical responsibility and so on, and involving arts and media. So again, not only connecting with people through that critical analysis and scientific data, but also through arts that we can reach out to people's hearts and minds, and not just giving data and figures. Um, I can again very briefly touch upon the issue of displacement, something that deeply bothers us, and my work is to engage with such people. We are now talking about right to stay and right to move. We are, of course, adopting a human rights based approach. We need to do much more on strengthening adaptation efforts, which are lagging behind again around the world, and how do we develop mechanisms to address human mobility, more climate finance. We need to look at adaptation strategies and plans, and of course, seeing how this new fund for responding to loss and damage can start addressing some of those needs that we have. All this needs to happen from the lens of fair share framework. Countries and corporations who are most responsible have to do more, and that's where US has a significant role under this framework, but has consistently fallen short. And I already touched upon US is responsible for a quarter of cumulative emissions, has known about the dangers for the last 50 years, and we also know the role fossil fuel industry played in promoting denial and disinformation through its campaigns. And of course, U.S. administration continues to obstruct negotiations. Even if it's out, we know that its influence remains. We have seen a latest example of on IMO related decision that was about to come, but Trump threatened that we cannot have a decision which is going to affect the maritime industry in the U.S. So, of course, we need to talk about organizing at a scale where global north and south are coming together. Even if when we see that global north is more responsible, but then as communities and people, everybody is suffering. So we need to look at climate reparations as a central piece for organizing global climate justice. And our struggles are deeply connected. We are demanding systemic change. We are talking about resource redistribution and connecting local impacts and global work. That's what is going to be key. And of course, building solidarity across movements is absolutely crucial. And that's where, again, I would underline calling out and oligarchs and elites and those countries who are promoting such inequality need to be called out. So to that, again, very briefly, I'm also engaged, as Keith said, I convened this Fill the Fund campaign, which we started as a solid mechanism to demand. In fact, we also connect with other campaigns and we say, make polluters pay to fill the fund. And we need such a campaign to make sure that the new fund has sufficient amount of money. And then, of course, my engagement with the fossil fuel treaty, where we talk about these three pillars. We demand a just transition. We talk about non-proliferation, which means ending the expansion of any new coal, oil, and gas production and infrastructure and phasing out in a just and equitable manner. So we have had some progress under UNFCCC, but we also realize that the power of the fossil fuel industry is not going to allow us. And that's why we are calling for a treaty as a companion to the Paris Agreement. Not getting into details, but just to say that we have made a lot of progress, and we see 18 nations now engaging and a huge support that has come from faith community, from young people, from Nobel laureates to indigenous states, and where we are right now. And that's where again we can connect the work that you are doing in the US, in the North America, in Canada, and so on. We are right now at a phase where we are now formalizing the multilateral process. So we grew the campaigns now of 6-year-old campaign. We had different phases. We have had political buy-in, and now we are looking at how we really convene that space. And that's what led to the Santa Marta process. I'm sure you know about the first conference that happened in April, and Fossil Fuel Treaty played a very important role in making it happen, where Colombia and the Netherlands came together. And as Keith was mentioning, 57 countries were present and many stakeholders. And it was a massive breakthrough. And now this next conference is going to be in Tuvalu, end of April next year. So we are seeing a massive momentum now, and this issue is back on the agenda after so much of struggle. And yeah, that's where we are trying to connect the dots. We know it's not going to be easy. We know that there's global power dynamics, and it's very complex, but that's exactly the reason we need to come together as a global community and demand polluter pays principle and really address this issue in a systemic manner. Conscious of time, so I'm going to stop here, Keith, so that we can have more space for a conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Harjeet. And I know we've probably got a lot of questions coming up in the audience as, I think that was just a fantastic download of a lot of the international environment that we're seeing, and particularly with this lens of justice around, not just colonial reparations, but also climate reparations and the polluters pay principle, which I know many people on this call have been working on in their own backyards with regards to state legislation, et cetera. So very exciting. And also just, I think I was inspired, Harjeet, to hear, see your slide on where the fossil fuel treaty initiative has been, and that we're at phase 3. I think that we can sometimes convince ourselves that we're making no progress, and indeed it's not happening quickly enough. But I always remember that if you look at the projections that we had from the international community on where we could be at emissions going back to 2014, and then you look at where we are today, we're still going up, but we're going up slower than they predicted in 2014. So these are very challenging times, but you've just given an incredible download to us. I want to invite friends, if you have any thoughts, comments for discussion, please raise your hand. I see we've got our first question from Jonathan Betzall. Jonathan.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this concise and effective summary of the issues. Many of us, as Keith says, have been engaged with them for years. My own interest is in the arts and cultural area, and I wonder if you have resources to share of people who are already active in this area, resources that we could share with others. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I don't see any other hands, so probably I'll respond to it. Oh, absolutely. And that's where we also connect a lot with faith community. In fact, I was in London for the Climate Action Week, and I happened to announce the launch of a letter that was signed by 200 artists from around the world calling for a fossil fuel treaty. Our own president, Kumi Naidu, alongside this work, also runs the whole campaign on artivism. And I would request you to explore artivism. So it's activism and art coming together. And that's a fantastic way of reaching out to people's hearts and not just minds, as I said. And it's really important because what we have done, and that's the realization, last 30 years, we've just taught too complex things and too much of data, which is important, but we have not moved people's hearts. And that's where, again, role of faith community and art, artists is so important to connect with people's hearts and talk about care, compassion, and our relationship with Mother Earth and planet and all the flora and fauna. And art can play such an important role in communicating that in a very simple manner. So yeah, thank you for raising that.
Thank you, Jonathan. Nancy.
Yes, Harjeet, thank you. I'll repeat the previous friend said, the gift you gave us today of both understanding and heartful connection. And I want to note that your very last point about people connecting directly with each other, the technology, thank God, allows us to do that as we are right now, people to people. And out of that, we have created Equatorial Voices Network, which are climate activists working locally in India and in East Africa, supporting each other across their national borders and working also with us in here in the US. And it's connected with Quaker Earthcare Witness, and most of the people involved are Quakers living in East Africa, and leadership of the Perma Gardens Foundation in India and East Africa, which has already created several thousands of the traditional kitchen garden, except it's not traditional. It brings in a different way of structuring the soil because the focus is on healing the soil as well as healing the people. And keep emphasizing that what saves people also saves the other species. We are literally in this together. And this notion of our futures being connected, keep going back to that. It is a matter of justice. It's also a matter of our care for each other as human beings. And when we know each other personally, that grows from the ground up, the support for the policies and legal protections and financing that need to occur at those higher levels. So thank you very much for the depth and completeness of your vision. I'm going to be able to use it to carry to many other places.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for your kind words, and yeah, and also sharing about your initiative. One thing that I did not talk about, I don't like talking a lot about myself, so, but one of the other initiatives that I am part of, which I think Keith briefly mentioned. So my wife and I co-founded an organization 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago, in 2016, after I returned from Paris. Honestly, when the agreement was reached in 2015, on one hand, part of the world was celebrating that at least now we have a new agreement. I knew deep down that yes, we have come together as 200 nations. We are going to walk in the same direction. At least that consensus is there, but we are not going to walk fast enough, and look at where we are. And that frustration forced us, and my wife used to work a lot with urban communities, urban poor, particularly in India. And we also see a lot of migration happening in countries like India because of the agrarian crisis, because farmers have been facing climate impacts, not getting enough support from the government. So we thought we should actually contribute something. And for me, unfortunately, because of my work at the policy level, I get to spend more times in conference halls and hallways. And I was like, I don't belong to this. I need to do this, but I just can't spend my life there. So then we started an initiative on ground working with farmers. And we wanted to spend more time in villages and helping them. So we started regenerative farming. And I am pleased to share that it has now grown into a full blown initiative, which we never imagined. And we are actually promoting the concept of eating right. We call it Eat Right. And now we have a platform called eatrightbasket.com, which is all about healing the soil, as you said, and connecting farmers and talking about adaptation, talking about healthy living, healthy eating, and connecting farmers with urban consumers. One thing that we realized, uh, uh, which actually we credit farmers for pushing us. They said, if you want us to heal the soil and do regenerative farming, you have to go and get us demand for the work that we are doing. Otherwise, we won't be sustainable, which was an opportunity for us to connect urban consumers who had more capacity to pay for what they were growing. And I can say very, very proudly and with a lot of gratitude to those farmers that who we started working with 10 years ago are staying with us because we are able to connect them with urban consumers who care for planet, who care for their own health, and they are supporting those farmers by buying those products. So it's a daily, boring, mundane work, but that has brought more change than anything else because that fundamental thing was needed. So yeah, and the name of the organization Satat Sampada, if I, it's a Hindi phrase. Satat means sustainable, and Sampada means natural resources, our planet. That's how the name came 10 years ago. So we thought that's our tiny contribution to the planet directly, because these policy changes take a lot of time. So that's how we are trying to balance our lives by spending some time on ground and then forced to spend time in those air-conditioned conference rooms. So
Well, thank you, Harjeet. I feel like I find myself thinking the same thing sometimes when
Gotta reload.
working at QEW or coming back from FGC, where I just need to return back to the land and sink my fingers in the soil. So it's very exciting to hear what you guys.
excellent.
Eric.
Yeah, thank you. I'm up here in Canada, so in Ottawa, and I've been concerned with the environment since about 1970 when it first became obvious. The thing that strikes me is how slow we're adapting to a real problem, especially the upper corporate world. And it seems to me that unless they're faced with a disaster that will affect them, they won't do much. I like telling people that since 40 degrees temperature is becoming worldwide, I say, if you go to a doctor, your natural temperature is 37. What would happen if it's 40 degrees, it's so moist you can't sweat, and you can't get to an air-conditioned room? Then you're in trouble. And they think, oh my God, that would be terrible. So how can change come? I think of COVID when the disaster hit us in the face. We finally did something. In 1930, the World Depression, they finally did the Great New Deal because even the corporations said, geez, we don't do something, we're stuck. And the tax went up to 80% to them. So here, the question is, how can this shock treatment work? One last little thing, a book called The Ministry of the Future in northern India, where you're from. In that story, it's a novel. 2 million people died because it's over 40 degrees, it's moist, and they couldn't get air conditioner. Could that be a lesson to say, this is just a novel, but it could happen? So how can people in the streets change to get the corporation to say, if you don't do something, you're in big, big trouble? How can that happen? Thank you.
So, Eric, you're spot on. And unless that's true, unless that problem reaches us, reaches home, we don't act. That's a human behavior, and corporations are no different. The only layer that I would add is they're far more powerful, and they have only been looking at their own vested interests. And in fact, what deeply pains us, and that's which I very briefly mentioned in my presentation, that some of the climate action is going to hurt people even more because of they talk about geoengineering. They talk about building walls, and for them they're building bunkers, and they're talking about cloud seeding and talking about corporate solutions to agriculture so that we don't develop seeds that are resilient to climate change, but we buy from them so that they profit from this crisis. So I agree with you almost entirely, with only a rider, that we have seen corporate power becoming more and more concentrated in fewer hands, and they are only looking at their own survival. And some corporations and private sector in general also recognizes that from a longer term perspective, the global inequality that we are facing is not good for them as well. Because if you have only a few set of buyers, then you are not able to create market as well. So you need purchasing power which is distributed and not concentrated in the hands of a few. So yes, we can have that shared narrative, but it is still not there, which is challenging the dominant narrative, the way our economies are constructed, the way our societies are constructed. So you're absolutely right. We need something that happened in 1930s, and for a brief moment, what COVID did, it shook us badly. But unfortunately, because of those powers, post COVID, we are back to square one. I'm not losing hope, and that's why I continue to work in this area. You are way more senior. You have seen much more, and yeah, we just need to make sure that we point towards the problem far more clearly and mobilize people. And that's why, as Keith mentioned in this talk and the work that you are doing, mobilizing people and organizing people is going to be extremely important. And one other thing that I also underline, no mobilization or no mobilizing without organizing, because we have seen uh, detrimental effects of that. When you mobilize people and they are not organized, then you don't know what that mobilization is going to lead to. People have taken uh, those same vested interests have benefited from that mobilization because they use that narrative for their own interest. So, and that organizing is a long-term work that we have to do. And that's where, again, I would say, and I'm not saying just because I'm talking to you as a faith community, I do see faith community has a very important role because of your connections with people, because of your moral standing and moral credibility, and because of your closeness with people and your values of care, compassion. You'll be taken, and as faith community, you'll be taken far more seriously than anybody else saying the same thing. So we do have a very important role. Sorry, for long intervention.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Harjeet. And, one of the things I've taken to saying recently is, I've stolen from somebody, but there's kind of two forces that kind of shape history, organized people and organized money. And we have to figure out how to make it organized people. And with that, we'll need powerful narratives and stories and witness and examples. And so that's where I think the faith community comes in, is with that sort of moral standing. Thank you. Pat.
Harjeet, I want to thank you very much, as I think everybody on this call would, for such a compelling, rich, complete, concise overview of the dilemmas we're in, with some really effective solutions provided. And I have a question based on the title that I understood from this talk. The title that I saw was Climate Justice and the Criminalization of Dissent. And I certainly got a full and complete account of climate justice, for which I'm very grateful. What I didn't hear, and perhaps I didn't listen closely enough, was about the criminalization of dissent. And how that comes to me is awareness that your country was one of the forerunners, at least historically, of a significant element of social justice and independence in the form of Gandhi's Salt March, which is such a reference point for us. And there are some of us who have experience in nonviolent direct action as a way to move social forces, political forces, in ways that weren't possible without that. So I wonder, in the United States, where we have such intensified criminalization and in other countries as well. Do you have any thoughts or insights you might be able to present about more intensified approach that usually I would think would be important?
Yes, Pat, thank you so much for bringing that up. And yeah, I did not address much in my presentation, but yeah, we can definitely talk about it. So clearly, as you are rightly mentioning, it's a global playbook that we are seeing at this moment. There's a very clear connection between fossil fuel interests and right-wing populism that we are seeing. And as we begin to transition to clean energy, and it becomes more and more inevitable, the fossil fuel industry is also panicking. And we know that fossil fuel industry is on life support. I mean, if I talk about subsidies, we're looking at direct and indirect subsidies amounting to $7 trillion annually, which amounts to $13 million per minute. Let me repeat, 13 million US dollars per minute. That's the level of subsidy that's going to the fossil fuel industry. And they know that now renewables have become economically feasible and technologically being made available. Yes, not everything is perfect about renewables, but it's a solution at this moment. And that's where they are panicking, and they know that they rely on state power to protect their profits. So what they are going to enforce is climate imperialism, and then they would like to silence all kinds of opposition. I mean, my own story, when what happened to me on 5th of January is an example. My home and office were raided by my own government and with the false charge that I'm undermining national energy interest. Now, because I'm an international staff and I have been getting my remuneration for the last 20 years in dollars and pounds from different organizations, they looked at that remittance and saying, you're a foreign agent. Without, imagine on 6th, in the late night of 5th, without completing the investigation, they just put out a note to the press without concluding the case saying that I am undermining national energy interest without even giving a chance of natural justice to even defend the case. So that's something that we are seeing happening around the world, and I'm not the first one, and unfortunately not going to be the last one. And it's not an isolated event. We are seeing this thing happening in Argentina or even in the US and in the UK. It's a coordinated and very reactionary backlash against environmental defenders, because when you threaten those corporate profits, then they threaten your freedom, then they want to silence you. So it's a trend, it's a playbook that we are seeing. Uh, but then I'm very lucky that despite everything that happened, courts stood with me and for me, and that's why I was able to secure my freedom. I took them to high court, and again, I would say I was very fortunate. After what happened to me, I got so many calls from my friends and supporters. They all wanted to help me. And one of the environmental lawyers who said, Harjeet, I was waiting for your call because my phone and laptop were seized. So I could not reach people because I didn't have their numbers. So it took me a while to reach out. But anyway, what we need is really that solidarity that we need to have between global north and global south. One thing that I would say I have also evolved in my own understanding. Of course, we talk about global north versus global south when we look at historical injustices, colonialism, racism, slavery. But when I look at people in the global north also suffering because of the economic model that we have created, because of the inequality, it's time for us to fight against this model together. When we talk about workers in the fossil fuel industry, they're not only stuck in the global south, but also in the global north. And no just transition is being offered to them to a large extent, despite global north having resources. It's not even protecting its own people. So, and the kind of pollution that we see in the US also, where traditionally used to have very high standards. What's happening? People's land are being taken away, they are being dispossessed. Indigenous people are seeing the kind of displacement, the lands being taken away for fossil fuel extraction. We need to show that solidarity with each other against some of these forces. And yeah, that's why these conversations are so important, to have that shared narrative, and how we can really join forces and work together against that right-wing populism and the fossil fuel industry and those elites and those oligarchs.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Pat, for that question, and Harjeet for that answer. We just came away from one of the premier Quaker conferences of the U.S. Friends General Conference, and one of the keynote speakers was speaking about how we live in a world where you're treated more kindly by the justice system if you're rich and guilty than poor and innocent. And we need to have, I think that it's just so fundamentally necessary that we build that sort of foundational solidarity, that people do stand up in the way that they did for you, Harjeet, and that we make a ruckus, and so I'm very inspired by that. And Harjeet, if you have any further thoughts about how that plays into the strategic environment, I think we'd all be delighted to hear them.
Yeah, thank you for those words, Keith. And yes, we are seeing. So one good thing is that, as I said earlier, we now have a shared narrative between the global north and global south, which did not exist, I can tell you, even 5 years or 10 years ago. I used to challenge my friends in the civil society from the global north, saying, "You are not with us, you're not acknowledging and realizing the pain that we are going through." When I used to say several years ago that 200 million people in India do not have access to adequate energy, and you're only putting pressure on a country like India. Yes, it is industrializing. Yes, it has high emissions. If you look at aggregate emissions, third in the ranking, but you're not looking at per capita emissions. You're not looking at historical injustices. You're not looking at people's energy needs, and they need to come out of poverty. There used to be a lot of fight and argument. That has changed. And I'm happy to share that has changed in the last few years. And that happened because, as I said, because we are all in this together, we are realizing that the whole climate imperialism and climate colonialism is now affecting all of us. And we need to challenge those dominant powers, and we need to be together. We need to talk about, I'll give you another very latest example. In London Climate Action Week, just 2-3 weeks ago, there was a discussion about habitability, because people were suffering from heat wave as this Climate Action Week was being held. One of the major events on heat wave was cancelled because of heat wave. So So people are realizing that it's not a geographical issue anymore. Yes, there are some who are more and disproportionately affected. So I would say it's really about shared narrative. It's about leveraging our power from local to national to regional to global. It's about that solidarity, international visibility is important. Again, I would say so far, I can't say about the future. 6 months have passed since that incident. I think the kind of international solidarity that I could see in my case probably is working as a shield to some extent, that I've not seen many actions against. The way we write letters, the way we amplify stories, the way we have different organizational platforms to support and protect frontline defenders who are facing that kind of criminalization is extremely important. How we come together. We also need to provide assistance in a very structured manner to those environmental defenders, and so that we are able to protect them and protect the kind of resistance that is required in the world, which of course is risky, and people are putting their lives on the line, to protect environment, to protect us. So for everybody, and particularly faith community, to stand with them and for them is so important.
Well, I think we have enough time for maybe a couple more questions. And then what you said, Harjeet, there about how we build power from the local to the, regional to the national to the international, I think is so vital. And I wouldn't want to leave today without a brief discussion on how people can take action and how we can start to tie those threads. This idea of the polluters pay principle, right? That Harjeet mentioned many times. The same argument that they're making at the International Court of Justice is similar to the arguments that we will need to be making in our courts as we pass state legislation to pressure these companies to pay for the to pay for the damages they caused. And so we have some I have some thoughts for us all to be leaving with on that. But I'm wondering if anyone who hasn't spoken yet or has been maybe sitting on something, if there's a voice or two that feels called to share. Yeah, Nick.
Dear Harjeet, thank you so much for your work, for your courage, and for your intellectual vigor. I am deeply inspired, and I want to further educate myself in these issues. And I was wondering if you could recommend any podcast or media source that I can begin my journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, so much for your kind words. All of us are doing our bit, and I'm trying at my level in a humble way. Of course, there are so many books that you can read, and one of the ones that I also refer to is Disaster Capitalism, which goes back. Naomi Klein had written that book long ago, which actually shapes our thinking on how some people are profiting. Of course, Ministry for the Future, something that I think who mentioned Eric, I think you mentioned about this book, of course. If you want to go a little bit deep into science, I would recommend Carbon Brief, which does an amazing work on science. I would also say if you want to know about negotiations, subscribe to Climate Home or Climate Change News, which can provide you regular updates on what's happening on climate. And they are now beginning to do many ground stories. So those are Guardian also does some very informative pieces on a regular basis. I would also recommend Drilled Media, which is again based in the US, but doing some amazing stories. And they do in-depth work. Drilled, DRILLED. What else? So I refer to those because one gets very up-to-date information on what's going on. Inside Climate News, again based in the US, which gives you work that's happening in the US, but also beyond. And the Grist also does quite a bit of work and deep, long stories on some of these issues. Yeah, that's what I would recommend for you to remain updated on a number of things.
I can personally recommend some of those too. That Carbon Brief is a pretty phenomenal way to keep track of what's happening across the world. It's got a little bit of a Britain-centric perspective, but if you want something that's got real depth and isn't just kind of your, everyday New York Times article, that's a fantastic service. Yeah. Any other
one book which I have been gifted by the author, who's a good friend, and I'm yet to read, which is on my list, which is this the States of Transition by Peter Newell, who has also been one of the initial promoters of fossil fuel treaty. And I saw on LinkedIn he has just been awarded. So he teaches at the University of Oxford. So this is something which is going to guide the transition that we all need to undertake. So I have just started reading, I would say, something which I'm going to do in the next few weeks.
I love it. All right, maybe one more question, and then we'll kind of touch in on our final action element today. Well, if we don't have a question, I think that's absolutely fine. Say, great, Dick.
I apologize for being late coming, but my question is, I'm wondering why the most effective, least expensive, and most humane way of decreasing carbon output is family planning. And why do you think that's not really supported very well in this country or elsewhere?
So, Richard, my response, and thank you for raising that. The issue gets controversial in so many ways when we talk about family planning. I can share my very personal reflections, but also bringing a little bit of political dimension to it. If you ask me as an Indian citizen, and I have no hesitation in saying, I don't say that publicly because people will pick up only part of it and then misconstrue it and then misinterpret it. Of course, in a country like India, where just when we got independence, we had about 350, 330 million people. And now we are a country of 1.4 billion people. It affects us, no doubt about it. Because land has not increased, per capita natural resource is rather depleted. So population is an issue. I have no hesitation in acknowledging it, recognizing it. But if you look at the reason for that population explosion in India was actually because of the way government transformed the health system. So the fertility rate was still high because of our some cultural and some lack of health facilities. People used to have more children because the mortality rate was high. So when the mortality rate went down, fertility rate did not catch up in the same level. And that's how we now see that so-called explosion, right? But at the same time, why it gets political is because of the reason, and if you missed my presentation, 12% of population in the developed world is responsible for more than 50% of cumulative emissions. That's what explains that population cannot be just an issue. Yes, as I said, from a natural resource perspective, per capita, it's an issue that we need to deal with. And also the argument that we are going to be 9 billion over the next few decades, whether the planet will have enough to feed 9 billion. There's also analysis that says, yes, we can feed 9 billion people, but not the lifestyle that people have in the global north. That's super clear. I keep saying that, and I'm on record saying it, that I can't see every Indian living the same lifestyle. Even as a European, forget about American lifestyle. You can't afford an average European lifestyle for 1.4 billion people. So yes, population is an issue, but we can't just look at population in isolation. We need to look at consumption. We need to look at the inequality of consumption between developed and developing countries, between rich and poor, both within countries and between nations. So I hope I answered your question. It's a little bit more nuanced response to what you asked. So yes, less population is going to help us deal with several issues, but not everything, especially when we talk about inequality of emissions, inequality of wealth, and so on.
Thank you.
I think I'm hearing a bit of, there's sort of an all of the above approach there, that family planning is obviously an essential thing in our world for many reasons. But then, I was thinking about that 40 trillion number that you dropped on us, Harjeet, earlier today. And if we're not addressing some of those foundational aspects of colonialism, that's the bill that we all owe. Was it just India or the global South? I didn't quite capture.
No, Indian subcontinent.
Just
So
the Indian
you can say just Indian subcontinent. So yeah, so imagine from a quarter of world's GDP to 4% in 200 years.
Yeah, and we've paid, supposedly 100 billion in non-finance and in debt-based. Here's some debt that we'll give you so that you can get some. You still have to pay us this back.
Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable. So there are some serious justice questions to be answering in concert with these questions around how do we develop sustainable societies, both in terms of consumption and with our world's population. I really appreciate, Harjeet, everything that you said, and all the questions everybody's given. If we actually want to just take a moment to celebrate everything that Harjeet has given us today. Yes. Thank you so much. And I just want to end quickly by mentioning a few things. In the email we started out with, that invited you all to this event, it was mentioned that there's actually the US is one of the countries that so clearly, we are the largest historical emitter of fossil fuels, period, in the world. If you add up all of the emissions, it's the US. And so our obligation to try to pay for the damages is larger than any country in the world. And so one of the things I've just dropped in chat here is that you can actually take action with FCNL today to support this mission of filling the fund. There's 270 million in climate assistance that the US has been consistently giving to adaptation work, and other couple $100 million for biodiversity and for trying to transition from renewables towards renewable energy. And these are all on the line right now. The biodiversity looks like it's the one that may stand, but all of the other pieces are falling. And the bill is just passed through the Rules Committee and could possibly face a vote on the House floor this week. So if you have the capacity to call your congresspersons about saying that this is an issue that matters for voters here in the United States, I think that's a fantastic way to step forward and start turning this into an initial push. The second thing I wanted to name is, and I'll share my screen really briefly here, is that if you're in one of these states, your state may be working on the same thing at the domestic scale that Harjeet is fighting for on the global scale. And it's us building the argument, the legal argument here in the States, I think, is a foundational piece to building it across the world. So if you're interested in, if you're from Maine, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Illinois, Massachusetts, Oregon, Hawaii, California, even these ones that failed, they'll come back in a new legislative session. California, Virginia, Connecticut, Tennessee, any of these states. QEW is working in building out an action center for us to be taking action on these issues. And we'd love for your support in that. And you can also follow up on any and all of this at the, to stay involved in these kind of polluters pay efforts using the link that I've just dropped in chat. So that's kind of a quick overview of some things. I hope that you all will take the time. It feels good to show up to a webinar where you learn a lot of things, but if you don't put it into action, we don't get that extra benefit of active hope. So I hope you will give a gift to yourself to take action and make your voice heard, and potentially find your way to committing to being more involved in creating, the kind of, we need organized people to beat organized money. And so you all are, I hope you all will help us and become a part of that. So thank you so much, everybody. Harjeet, I'm wondering if you have any final words that you'd like to share with us before we head out today.
Well, I can only thank all of you for your interest and engagement and bringing so much of wisdom and knowledge to this work, and your commitment, of course, to fight for justice. When people like us in the global South stand against and against those powers and for those people who are getting affected, when we see people like you fighting the same cause in other part of the world, we feel so much of solidarity, support, encouragement, and inspiration that we are not and we are not alone. We are all together, even if we don't meet regularly, even if we don't see each other. But it's that feeling that we are fighting for the right cause together is so important when the world is becoming more and more crazier in so many ways. So this solidarity really matters, and I'm deeply touched by the work you do, and really looking forward to working together in so many ways. So thank you for your solidarity, support, and your commitment to the cause.
Well, thank you, Harjeet, and thank you everyone here today. I think we're stronger together, and it's been a beautiful time. So thank you all. I hope you all have fantastic days heading off into the world to make a difference. Ursula, did you unmute?
Sorry.
Oh, well, if you did have anything to say, it's okay. We could hear it. But thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate all of your time, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Harjeet.